One of my earliest childhood memories was hearing the church bell ring for Sunday morning worship in the small rural town where I grew up. The Methodist church was an old wooden structure with a bell tower, two small but comfortable classrooms for children in Sunday school, wooden doors to separate them from the sanctuary, and a raised balcony that served as classrooms for the older children. It was less than 2 blocks from my house. When the bell rang, we gathered as a family and made our weekly pilgrimage to the church. In that rural environment of the 1950s, the 3 churches in the town of around 500 inhabitants were the center of community life. The local Methodist church, to which my family belonged, sponsored social gatherings with homemade ice cream, chicken pot pie dinners and corn toast. My family and I were always involved in all 3, but each one happened only once a year. In addition, there was a 2-week community Bible school every June, and I was a regular attendee during my 8th grade years at the school. However, Sunday morning worship and Sunday school were weekly events, and I strived to keep increasing my collection of perfect attendance pins and awards for memorizing Bible verses. By the time I was in high school, the local Methodist church had closed and we were attending the Methodist church in the neighboring town, which was slightly larger than the town I lived in. There, for the first time, my thoughts began to focus on ministry as a personal calling. I became active in the Methodist youth group and eventually served as a district and conference representative. I also became a regular preacher during the Sunday youth service. My preaching began to attract the attention of the whole community, and soon I was occasionally frequenting the pulpits of other churches, nurseries and various church-affiliated youth and ladies groups, where I generally broke attendance records. At the age of 17, when I started my first year at Harvard University, my decision to enter the ministry had been solidified. During that year I enrolled in a 2-semester course in comparative religion, which was taught by Wilfred Cantwell Smith, whose area of specialization was Islam. During the course I paid much less attention to Islam than to other religions, such as Hinduism and Buddhism, as these two seemed much more esoteric and strange to me. In contrast, Islam seemed somehow similar to my own Christianity. As such, I didn't focus on it as much as I probably should have, although I do remember writing a paper for the course on the concept of revelation in the Quran. However, as the course had strict academic requirements and standards, I acquired a small library of half a dozen books on Islam, all written by non-Muslims, which would serve me well 25 years later. I also acquired 2 different English translations of the meaning of the Quran, which I read at the time. That spring Harvard named me a Hollis Scholar, which meant I was one of the top pre-theology students at the university. The summer between my freshman and sophomore years at Harvard I worked as a youth minister in a large United Methodist church. The following summer I obtained my license to preach from the United Methodist Church. When I graduated from Harvard University in 1971, I enrolled at Harvard Divinity School, where I earned my Master of Divinity in 1974. I had previously been ordained into the diaconate of the United Methodist Church in 1972 and had previously received a Stewart Scholarship from the United Methodist Church, as a supplement to my Harvard Divinity School scholarships. During my seminary education I also completed a 2-year program as a chaplain at Peter Bent Brigham Hospital in Boston. Following my graduation from Harvard Divinity School, I spent the summer as the minister of 2 United Methodist churches in rural Kansas, where attendance was at an all-time high not seen in those churches in many years. From the outside, I was a very promising young minister who had received an excellent education, drawn large crowds to Sunday church service and succeeded at every step on the ministerial path. On the inside, however, I was in a constant struggle to maintain my personal integrity in the face of my ministerial responsibilities. This war was very different from the one presumably waged by some later televangelists as they tried in vain to maintain their personal sexual morality. Likewise, it was very different from that waged by the pedophile priests who make the headlines today. However, my battle to maintain personal integrity may be the most common among the more educated members of the ministry. There is a certain irony in the fact that the supposedly best, brightest and most idealistic of future ministers are selected by the best seminarian education, i.e. the one offered at the time at Harvard Divinity School. The irony is that, having received this education, the seminarian is exposed to every known historical truth about 1. The formation of the main, early church, and how it was shaped by geopolitical considerations. 2. The original reading of various biblical texts, many of which are in profound contrast to what most Christians read when they pick up their Bible, although, gradually, some of this information is being incorporated into the new and better translations. 3. The evolution of such concepts as a triune Godhead and the sonship of Jesus. May God praise him. 4. The non-religious considerations that form the basis of many Christian beliefs and doctrines. 5. The existence of those early Christian churches and movements that never accepted the concept of a triune Godhead and never accepted the concept of the divinity of Jesus. May God praise him. And 6, etc. Some of the fruits of my seminary education are recounted in more detail in my recent book The Cross and the Crescent, an interfaith dialogue between Christianity and Islam. An interfaith dialogue between Christianity and Islam, Amana Publications, 2001. Thus, it is not surprising that virtually the majority of seminary graduates leave the seminary not to fill pulpits, where they would have to preach what they know not to be true, but to enter various counseling professions. This was also the case for me, as I went on to obtain a master's degree and a doctorate in clinical psychology. I continued to call myself a Christian, because that was a necessary part of self-identity and because I was, after all, an ordained minister, even though my full-time job was as a mental health professional. However, my seminary education had accounted for any beliefs that might have to do with the triune Godhead or the divinity of Jesus, God bless him. Regular surveys reveal that ministers are less likely to believe these and other church dogmas than the lay people they serve, with ministers more likely to understand terms like Son of God metaphorically, while their parishioners understand it literally. So I became a Christmas and Easter Christian, attending church very sporadically and gnashing my teeth and biting my tongue when I heard sermons supporting what I knew was not the case. None of the above should be taken to imply that I was any less religious or spiritually oriented than I used to be. I prayed regularly. My belief in a supreme deity remained solid and secure, and I conducted my personal life according to the ethics I was once taught in church and Sunday school. I simply had enough knowledge not to buy into the man-made dogmas and articles of faith of the organized church heavily supported by pagan influences, polytheistic notions and geopolitical